afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting us here to talk to you today. My name's Liz Pryor. I'm the founder and CEO of the Anne Robson Trust. And this is my colleague, Jason Hodges, who's our fundraising manager. Anne Robson was my mum. In 2010, she was admitted to hospital having fallen out of bed in a care home. It was a disaster from the moment she arrived. Sadly, care was poor, nurses were unkind, and Mum begged us to get her out. The hospital had an outbreak of norovirus, so we couldn't visit her, and we felt completely helpless. Much to our surprise, Mum was discharged a week later, but sadly died a matter of hours after arriving home. The ambulance drivers thought she'd been fast-tracked home to die, and yet the nurse who discharged her told my sister that Mum was bright as a button and ready to go home. This terrible experience was the springboard for me to start working alongside the NHS in order that other people didn't have to spend their final days alone. By 2016, I was working with the Director of Nursing at my local hospital, having spent time working with 2 charities in and around numerous NHS trusts for the previous few years. She asked me to look at end-of-life care, as she knew it wasn't good enough in the trust. And that's where the end-of-life volunteer scheme was born. We recruited and trained 20 volunteers, and within 6 months, the project had supported hundreds of patients with overwhelmingly positive feedback and had won an award. The simplicity and effectiveness of what we were doing was amazing. I quickly discovered 2 things. Loneliness at the end of life is a widespread problem. Tens of thousands of people spend their final days frightened and alone with no visitors and no one to hold their hand. And a visit from a volunteer makes a massive difference to people spending their last days in a hospital bed. In 2018, I set up the Anne Robson Trust in Mum's memory. Our aim is to help hospitals set up teams of volunteers who provide companionship to people who are dying.
Now, since then, we've helped 8 hospitals to set up volunteer teams to spend time with patients in their last days and sometimes hours of their life. The most recent team started their patient visits just last week. We also have 2 more hospitals in the setup process. The coordinators are being trained and the volunteers recruited. Now, these teams are making a really big difference. Just last year, volunteers made over 4,700 visits, supporting more than 1,900 patients in their last days, and more than 2,300 hospital visitors. Statistics like this are all well and good, but behind every single one of those, there's a person with a story. Some of them have just got no family and friends left to visit. Some of them, their family don't make it back in time before they pass away. Now here's the difference that we made to Izzy and her granddad. The volunteers prioritise patients who don't have any other visitors. They read a book to them. They might play their favourite song one last time. They might talk to them about their grandchildren. And sometimes they just simply hold their hand. We're here today because we have 2 challenges that we'd like your help with. The first is a really big one. Thousands of people across the UK spend their final days alone in a hospital bed. That does not need to happen in 2023, does it? The solution isn't rocket science. In fact, if you take a look to your left, take a look to your right, that's the solution you're looking at right there, is people willing to sit, willing to listen, willing to give the gift of unhurried time. The second problem is that we're just not as connected to the volunteer visitors as we would like. We want to give them more support and to engage them better. This is limiting us a bit as a charity, as volunteers are often your most dedicated ambassadors, advocates and fundraisers. We're here at the Volunteero Conference. We don't need to tell you that. We want to work with the volunteers more closely. Volunteero's support would really help us to overcome both of these challenges and reach more people. Each new hospital volunteering team takes time and effort to set up. A £10,000 grant would go a really long way towards helping us set up 3 new additional hospital teams over the next 12 months, which would help an additional 1,200 patients every year on a rolling basis. And the Volunteero platform would help us to manage our relationships with the volunteer visitors, maximising their potential and increasing our impact in the long term. So you've seen where we are now, but there's some big gaps on that map, right? Those gaps represent people alone in hospital just watching the clock. Those are the locations where we want to establish new visiting teams. We can't promise to name them Volunteero Visiting Crews, but we'll put your stamp on it. The best bit is that the hospitals at each of these locations they've agreed to fund the biggest single cost of this project, the salary for a dedicated coordinator to manage the volunteers and identify priority patients who could really do with a visit. Now we just need to cover our costs. You can help us ensure that thousands more people like Izzy's granddad receive the companionship that they deserve when they don't have long in this world.
We don't believe anyone should have to die alone. Your support would mean that more people have a hand to hold, a listening ear, and the presence of another person when they need it most. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Liz and Jason. Liz, I'm sure that's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but it's a fantastic presentation and you're doing amazing stuff. So over to our wonderful judges.
Thank you, both of you, and congratulations. That's an amazing achievement, a hugely powerful organisation. In such a simple way, as you say. I'd be interested in terms of, you've got your aspirations to scale, and rightly so, given the size of the issue. Taking funding out of the equation, what's the biggest barrier to be able to scale to more locations and involve more people in this?
Getting funding for coordinators in NHS hospitals. They're really struggling. We all know how difficult NHS are finding things at the moment, and this isn't going to save anyone's life. It's not, it's not right up there with heart surgery and all the amazing stuff the NHS does, but we think it's really, really important. So we're always on the lookout for different ways to fund those coordinator posts, but at the moment they're mainly funded by the hospital charities. And all charities, as I'm sure everyone in the room will agree, we're all stretched and finding funding really challenging. So I would say that's the hardest thing.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I agree. Wonderful presentation. Could you just tell me a little bit more about what's your biggest success, the moment you're most proud of today?
Wow, that's a question. I think probably having an amazing team of people around me, being able to have set up something in Mum's memory. I've got a really cool team of 5 people working with us. It's a really happy office. I know we work in a challenging environment and it sounds a bit weird to say it's a happy office, but we have a very happy time and we work with amazing people. Palliative care teams are incredible people, and the volunteers that come forward are I'm constantly humbled by the people that come forward to do this role. It's a really challenging role to sit with someone, a dying stranger, essentially, and to support their families too. Sometimes, that's really hard. So I'm just so proud of the work that they all do. So I don't know if that's the proudest moment, but I'm very proud of all of it.
Great, thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Liz and Jason. That was fantastic.